All right, chapter 14, enforcement of HACCP. Our objectives for this chapter include inspection, structure, and functioning of FSIS and FDA. We're going to look at what your responsibilities are within the plant and what the difference is in the regulations for the different products that are required to be regulated through HACCP. And then we're going to look at the difference between the enforcement programs of FDA and FSIS. All right. So the USDA is in charge of meat and poultry containing products and liquid, frozen, and dried egg products. Now, the FDA is in charge of all other foods outside of meat, poultry, and egg products. And then we have processed fruits, vegetables, grain products, juice, dairy, seafood, and shell eggs. So a whole lot under the FDA there. The regulation comes from 9 CFR Part 417 for the USDA. That's HACCP for meat and poultry. And for the FDA, you can find it in 21 CFR Part 120 for juice and Part 123 for our fish and fishery products. We also have other regulations that we need to follow, and depending on which product you have, which product you're making, then you'll have to follow slightly different rules. So you would need to look at what's specific to your product. But for the FDA, for the Food Safety Modernization Act, they've passed preventive controls for human foods and preventive controls for animal foods. And so these go above and beyond the basic HACCP principles. What they do is they take the requirements for supplier control, sanitation control, and allergen control, and they elevate them to a standard that's higher than your regular prerequisite program. And the idea is to protect the product going one step back and one step forward in the food supply chain, making the manufacturer responsible for monitoring those because of the limited availability and staff of the FDA. They can't be everywhere all the time. And also they don't know our product as well as we know our own product. And so it means that it's on us to make sure that these regulations are being enforced and that we're keeping a safe product and that we're manufacturing things in a sanitary facility. Now in Canada, they have HACCP as well. They have the Food Safety Enhancement Program, which is mandatory for federally registered meat and poultry establishments. And they also have the Safe Food for Canadians Act, which is pretty similar to FSMA. Now in the European Union, they have HACCP as well. And that mandates all food business operators implement HACCP principles. That applies to imports as well. So wherever you're selling a product to, you have to follow the regulations for that country. So if I'm shipping to the US, I need to follow the rules in the US. If I am shipping to Canada, then I need to follow the rules in Canada. So FSIS for meat and poultry, FDA for juice and seafood. Basically, they say that every processor shall conduct or have conducted for a hazard analysis. For meat and poultry and for juice, they require a written hazard analysis, but not for seafood. So when we start looking at different products, we see that there are, small differences for everything. So that's why we need to make sure that we picked the right regulation when we were looking at building our HACCP plan. When we look at different hazards, they require us to look at things like decomposition, that's the breakdown of your product, parasites. Maybe I have some worms that are associated with a product I make because I'm making pork. Unapproved use of additives. So we need to make sure we're using additives that are allowed, that are safe, right? We don't want to use, like, say, a dye color that's unsafe to use. Like there's a blue color that's extremely toxic, or like they used to use arsenic for green. Not a good idea. So we're only going to use our safe additives. We have to look at our physical hazards because we don't want things like rocks or glass or something that could choke someone or like physically hurt someone ending up in their product. Zoonotic diseases. We know that Salmonella and E. coli are some big problems when it comes to our meat manufacturing process. And so we have to plan for that. Allergens, we have to be concerned about. We don't want any cross contact. We need to make sure they're labeled because it causes 30 to 50% of recalls. Patulin is a toxin that's associated with juice. So if you're making juice, that's something that you might want to consider, especially if you're making apple juice. Microbiological contamination, chemical contamination, pesticides. We have to make sure that they're registered with the EPA in the United States and that we're using them as instructed and that we're following those spray schedules and harvest schedules. And then drug residues for your meat. So if I'm using any kind of veterinary drugs in my meat process, I need to be actively testing to see if there's any drug residues in that meat by the time I'm slaughtering them, because I don't want to be accidentally giving a human being drugs to consume in their meat. So for your actual guidance, the FDA has the Fish and Fishery Products Hazards and Control Guidance. Juice has Hazards and Controls Guide. FSIS, we have a hazard identification guide. We have specifically E. coli 0157H7 in raw ground beef, Listeria monocytogenes in ready-to-eat products, and control the use and declaration of ingredients identified by the Food Allergen Labeling Consumer Protection Act. All of these you can look at, review, be a good thing for you to check out in your downtime, especially if you're very curious about this stuff. For your HACCP plan, both FDA and FSIS require that anyone who processes food has to have a written HACCP plan that they implement anytime their hazard analysis reveals one or more food safety hazards that are reasonably likely to occur, except thermally processed shelf-stable foods that don't need to consider microbiological hazards in a HACCP plan. And so you can see the regulations written right there where you would find them. Seafood HACCP, specified CBOT. Now, once you've created your HACCP plan, it needs to be signed and dated. Basically what that does is it says, as management, I approve this HACCP plan, I take responsibility for it. Same for your HACCP coordinator. So anytime you have any changes to your HACCP plan, that's going to get reviewed again, it's going to get signed again, and then it's going to happen at least annually. So we have all those reviews and checks in place and that responsibility going right in there. So your HACCP plan has to contain components related to the application of your HACCP principles, which means it's going to have all the things that we reviewed in class, the list of hazards, a list of our critical control points and the critical limits associated with them, how we're going to monitor those and what the procedures are for monitoring those, what corrective actions we're going to use if we have any deviations, and then what verification procedures we use and a record keeping system. That is what goes into your HACCP plan. Your corrective actions have to identify who's taking responsibility. It needs to show that you clearly identified and eliminated the cause of the deviation. So that's your corrective action, preventive action program. You need to bring your critical control point back under control after your action is taken, and we want to keep it from happening again. And one of the most important things is to make sure that no product that could harm a consumer gets out to the public so they can't buy it or consume it in some way. And then all of that needs to be well documented. So we're recording everything. Now, FSIS requires verification and validation. So when we have our initial setup of our plan or we're initially putting in a piece of equipment, we're going to have that beginning validation. Your verification activities like your record review and your testing, that's going to be happening on a regular basis. Calibrating your process monitoring instruments is going to happen at the intervals that you determined important. Direct observations of monitoring your activities, or monitoring your monitoring activities, right? You watch somebody doing the monitoring activity and reviewing those corrective actions that we're taking and reviewing all of those records. And then also reassessment of that HACCP plan that happens every year is another verification activity. Now, when it comes to FSIS, we have ongoing verification activities as well. This includes reviewing our consumer complaints. It's a good way to know if you have or are developing a problem. Then, of course, calibration of instruments and end product or in-process testing. Again, we see records review and reassessment of the HACCP plan at least annually. Now, record retention. You are required to keep your records for 1 year for raw or fresh products, 2 years for frozen, preserved, or shelf-stable products. And when you have multiple regulations or systems that you have to follow, they recommend that you follow whichever one means you're going to be keeping those records for the longest. Now, as far as where you keep your records can be kept off-site after 6 months for meat and poultry and juice, or upon seasonal closure for seafood and juice products. But one of the main requirements is that you have to be able to retrieve those documents within 24 hours. So if your auditor says, hey, I need your records, then you need to give it to them within a day. That is to prevent fraud. When it comes to record review, FSIS requires that we review all those records prior to shipment of meat and poultry. Now, on the other hand, for the FDA, we have 1 week to review those records. So for our juice products, our seafood products, we have 1 week. But for meat, you got to do it before you ship it. Now, training regulations require that a HACCP trained individual is involved in developing your hazard analysis, but that's only for juice, developing your HACCP plan, looking at verifying and modifying the HACCP plan, and reviewing the records, and that's specifically for the FDA. This person can be a consultant. They don't have to work for your company, but it helps if you do have HACCP trained individuals in your company, HACCP certified individuals in your company. You don't have to take this class in order to become a HACCP trained individual. FDA does allow qualification through job experience. Now, imported foods. When you're importing products, FSIS specifies that they have approvals for countries to export to the US based on the equivalency for inspection system. So is their system on par with ours? They also audit foreign systems and reinspect meat and poultry when it comes in to the port. In 120.14, importers are responsible for verification, same for seafood. And then 123.12A1 says that an active memorandum of understanding with the source country can apply for this requirement. Now, for methods of enforcement for regulators, they can look at our product, review it, they can test it, they can come audit us and do an inspection, look at our paperwork, look at how we're functioning and seeing if we're doing what we're saying we're doing. If we're not, there's a good chance that we'll get a deficiency letter or a 483. That's like a light warning. Gives you a little bit of time to fix your problem. If you don't, then you get a warning letter that's public, that goes on their website. And now everybody knows that you aren't following regulations, and it starts costing you a whole lot more money because now they have extra fees coming in. And so you have a specific amount of time to fix that problem. If you don't, they can actually keep you from making a product. They can seize your product. They can issue a recall, but it's a lot better if you as a company issue a recall. They can do import detentions, and they can even prosecute. So if you mess up bad enough and Say it was something intentional like fraud, the FDA can actually go after you and prosecute you and send you to jail, just like what happened in the issue with the Peanut Corporation of America, where several of their employees and their leadership ended up going to prison for a large number of years for intentionally committing fraud and spreading salmonella across the country and causing many people to get sick and die. So when it comes to our government regulations, we have some private companies that we can go to look for standards like NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation, SCS Global, or ASI Food Safety. We also have lots of different government regulations, and it could be local government, state government, or federal government. So we have the FDA, the USDA, both of those are federal, FSIS, NCDA is going to be your local government, your state government. Third-party audits. Now, for third-party audits, there's some really great things that we can gain from having these done. When somebody else is looking at your system, then it gives you an unbiased view from another source that's well-versed in how this stuff is supposed to work. And so they can identify things that you might not identify yourself. So it's really driving continuous improvement in food safety. It is required by the Food Safety Modernization Act to do those third-party audits. It makes you more marketable. So if you get a certification like SQF, Safe Quality Food, and that means that your customer knows that you're getting audited on a regular basis, that you're working on your quality programs. That means that you can sell to some of the big boys like Walmart or Subway. So third-party audits show that you're testing whether or not you're complying regularly and somebody else is doing that for you. Some of the troubles with third-party audits is that there are different standards for whatever system you're in. So you might be going for BRC, you might be audited against FSMA versus the HACCP regulations. So understanding which guidelines you need to follow is a big deal. So knowing which kind of audit you need that's appropriate is very important. Now, there also can be a conflict of interest, right? Like, I really want to get good scores, but I also need to save money so that I can, make my production happen. So that can be very challenging. Qualifications of auditors. So finding good auditors is important because they need to know and understand what they're doing. So we need to make an effort to search for a qualified auditor, and audits are expensive, really expensive, unfortunately. But it's good for you if you want to become an auditor. Government regulators, we have our FDA, the USDA. It's funded by our taxes. They can do unannounced inspections when they want to. Sometimes those are scheduled, sometimes it's coming-ish based on which system you're following, but they can just show up and say, hey, we're here to check out your system. When it's unannounced, it's a great way to see whether or not you're in compliance because you don't have any time to prepare for that auditor coming. And sometimes you'll notice that when you get audited by the government versus a third-party auditor, your results can be very different. And that's because different auditors are looking for different things. They're following different systems. They're people too. So they can have certain things that they're sticklers on. So they might not all be the same. All right, so we have a list of resources here that you might need to go to when you're writing your HACCP plan. So you'll probably want to check out the FSIS and FDA HACCP websites, NACM's reports and recommendations on FSIS, We have our HACCP main page, feeds and subscriptions, the FDA home site, all of our guidances, and the Big Bad Bug Book is a really good one if you're looking to figure out your microbiological hazards and how you are going to manage those. So I want to thank you all for attending this HACCP course and for listening to all these regulations. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for your time.